Good morning, Yidden. Again, we'll dedicate the class to the well-being of my grandmother, Chasia Bas Chayeshera, who I hope to be visiting. Okay, so today is the 24th of Teves, Chof Dalet Teves, which is the Yartzeit, the anniversary of the passing of the founder of the Chabad movement in Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel, 1813. Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe means old Rebbe or original Rebbe, as in the founder. I think there are other Hasidic circles that also have this title Alter Rebbe for their original founding Rebbe. So he's the author most famously of the Tanya. This is a beautiful special edition that we printed here at the FTC for our 25th anniversary. So just a word about that before we begin. So firstly, we talked a little bit about the Rambam on his Yartzeit, the 20th of Teves, which was Friday. And it's certainly by divine providence that the two of them have their Yartzeit in close proximity, the 20th of Teves and the 24th of Teves, respectively. And as we talked about the Rambam making Torah available to the masses, and that being controversial, in many ways, the Alter Rebbe's teaching paralleled that. When we were talking about that, you were talking about the making mystical teachings more available. And in many ways, that's part of what the Alter Rebbe did. One of the things Chassidus does, specifically Chabad Chassidus, is takes the esoteric language of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah in general, and gives it language that an average human can understand, even one uninitiated. Like my father would say, my father often says, if you want to know if you understood the Hasidic discourse, if you can explain it to an intelligent McGill student, you understood it well. Meaning to say that Hasidus has that capacity to be able to communicate deep mystical ideas in a language that anybody can understand. It takes a lot of study and a lot of work, but that's certainly a big part of the goal, which is why it's called Chabad. The movement Chabad is called Chabad in part because it speaks to the human intellect. And Chabad is an acronym, Chochma Bina Dat, for the human faculty of the human intellect.
So if it's made accessible as a lot, how do people, organizations get away with saying that they also make it accessible to the average person?
I'm sure many do.
Without Hasidus, without learning Torah, without even being Jewish.
Oh, in that sense. Well, I don't think necessarily someone has to be Jewish per se to learn Hasidus or Kabbalah.
Well, no,
but
what I'm saying is they
how
claim that they can make it so accessible that you can understand it without any background or any initiation. So
that's a good question. And look, certainly Hasidus requires studies. It definitely requires study and requires a teacher to teach. Certainly, I've been fortunate to have many good teachers, my father being first and foremost of them. I can't speak for other people's claims, but the fact that Hasidus is making Kabbalah available, I don't necessarily mean that the average uninitiated reader can open up and find and understand what's going on. Although to some degree, anybody intelligent can really read Tanya in English and understand what's happening to its full depth. I don't know. But I do mean that Kabbalah is largely masked behind language that has to be anthropomorphic. It talks about the body as a mirror for God's system, right? And if you read it alone without being initiated, it also has names for things that you wouldn't necessarily understand on its own. So say, for example, the word she, and it talks about she. What is that? So if you don't know that she is Malchus, what is Malchus? If you don't know what Malchus means, the capacity to project, which is why it's parallel with words. Why is it called she? Why is it called feminine? Well, because the power to project doesn't have anything on its own. It receives from the attributes that are above it, and then it can project outward, like the she that receives a seed from the male and then can produce a child. But if you don't know any of all that background, then there's a certain barrier to entry, a language barrier to entry, even if you had direct translation. And the language I just used to describe Malchus is Hasidic language. It's Hasidic language. So even if the average reader might open up and not see that, but that's the language Hasidus uses. So it takes some of the esoteric language and gives it a sort of human language. I'm not sure if I'm getting that, if I'm conveying that accurately.
But it just has these sort of groups have a very large following.
Certainly.
You know, and
yeah, certainly.
A family member that believes in them very much and has been deeply involved with them. And I'm trying to understand where we're going.
I can't say, I don't know, but I as a good like litmus test, if these teachings, these proposed teachings of Kabbalah and mysticism lead to deepened observance of Jewish halacha, Jewish law, of Torah mitzvahs, then there would be legitimacy. If it's not, then it's clearly void of what Torah truly is. That's the easiest litmus test. Because even Kabbalah, if you read Zohar from beginning to end, it's got a lot about the practice of putting on tefillin and what the significance of putting it on this way versus putting it on that way, and the significance of observing Shabbos and observing Yom Tov. Even if you learn this Kabbalah just on its basic level, from beginning to end, you learn Zohar, you'd have to be practicing Judaism on a very practical, literal level. And to strip it of that is to be dishonest. So that would be the easiest way to detect if something is legit or not legit. And the truth is, so speaking on that, that's part of perhaps the reason why the controversy around Hasidus is not as great as it used to be. The pushback against Hasidus in the first generation, too, from the Orthodox Jewish establishment is because this new way of thinking is going to distract from Torah observance. Especially the memory of Shabtai Tzvi was very fresh. The false Messiah who used Kabbalistic language. This idea of using Kabbalistic language isn't new. And the false Messiah, Shabtai Tzvi, who took thousands of Jews with him, many of whom were disillusioned or completely abandoned Judaism altogether. So that was fresh in people's minds. And when the Baal Shem Tov and then the Alter Rebbe came along and teaching Chassidus, many in the Torah world were worried about this. This was going to cause people to leave Jewish practice. Fast forward 300 years, no one's going to claim that Chassidus makes someone leave Judaism. No one's going to claim that anymore. So that's a big part of why the controversies has abided or subsided. Just incidentally, in parentheses, before I continue, go back to what I wanted to share earlier, I was invited to speak in Chicago a couple of years ago for Yom Kislev, the 19th of Kislev. And the rabbi of the congregation there introduced me, and he said the following. So he's describing his congregation. It's a fledgling young congregation, young people, and he's describing them the way some of the old guard established synagogues view them, shall we say. So he said, they call us the Neo-Hasidim. Neo-Hasidim. And the reason why people call them the Neo-Hasidim is because they aren't necessarily associated with any particular Hasidic path. They're mostly boys, girls, but boys of young men of a Litvish background. His background in the Litvish yeshiva of in-depth Talmudic learning. And as is often the case in Litvish circles, it's lacking a spiritual life to it. Musar maybe, minimally, but even Musar doesn't have necessarily a spiritual life. Musar has a rigorous ethical and moral code, but it's not necessarily spiritual per se. And these are young men looking for a spiritual connection. This is not unique to Chicago or their community. This happens in many places. So many of them find Hasidic circles to attach themselves to, and recently there's been like an increase in just general learning of Hasidus, not necessarily Chabad per se, but general learning of Hasidus, specifically the first generation of Hasidus. So Tanya would be part of it, the first generation or first two generations of Hasidus, and along with that, you would have the Menorah Samor, the Noam Elimelech, the Yartzeit, different works of that generation, the first generation of Hasidic masters. So there's an increase in learning this kind of stuff, and in an effort to invigorate the Judaism with spirituality. So he says they call us Neo Hasidim. So I'm quoting him, and he just said it so well, and coming from him was just beautiful. So he said, so I want to label our detractors as Neo Misnagdim. Misnagdim means the opposers. This is from the original establishment of Hasidus, when there was the opposition. The opposition were called the Misnagdim, the opposers. So he said, I want to coin our detractors. They're calling us Neo Hasidim. I want to call them Neo Misnagdim. Why Neo Misnagdim? Because originally the opposition was, well, Hasidus is going to take people away from Judaism. And of course, 300 years later, no one can make that claim. I mean, Hasidus does not take anybody away from Judaism. On the contrary, it's been bringing people back closer to Judaism. So what's the Neo Misnagdim? The Neo Misnagdim are those who say, oh, Hasidus is nice when you're a beginner, just to make people excited about Judaism. Hasidus is nice. But you want to get to the real beef of Torah, got to come to us. He said, that's the Neo Misnagdim. And this is a claim we hear often. Chabad house is good for chicken soup and to get little inspirational words. When you want to get real Torah. So this young rabbi says, this is the Neo Misnagdim. Because if they only knew that to open up Shara Yichud V'Amunah, part 2 of Tanya, in which the Alter Rebbe lays out the philosophy of the oneness of God, they only knew how rigorously intellectually difficult it is to understand and comprehend that and work through it. They would not say that this is for beginners only. Of course, it's for beginners as well, but it's not only for beginners. At any rate, close parentheses. Anyways, I want to share with you just an interesting idea that comes from Tanya in honor of the Alter Rebbe's Yartzeit. And that is as follows. So if you're, I'm sure you've heard the language, Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov. Good inclination, bad inclination. Of course, this language comes from the Gemara, from classic Jewish sources, so certainly, I'm sure we're familiar. The good inclination and the bad inclination. Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov. Now, the Alter Rebbe came, and borrowing from the Eitz Chaim, introduced something, the language called Nefesh Bahamas, animal soul, and Nefesh Elokis, godly soul. So, to the superficial reader of Chassidus, they might say, oh, it's interchangeable. Yetzer Tov could be Nefesh Elokis. Yetzer Tov, good inclination, could be godly soul. And Nefesh Bahamas, animal soul, could be Yetzer Hara, evil inclination. They're just different words for the same kind of thing. And this is not true. And I want to share a little bit of why there's a change in language and what that means. So certainly the Alter Rebbe is not disregarding, God forbid, the language of the Gemara of Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov. The Alter Rebbe would never do that, God forbid. Uproot a modality of the Gemara. But the Alter Rebbe is digging to a deeper layer. Let me explain. And the objective of digging this deeper layer actually gives us the key in how to deal with the Yetzer Hara and how to deal with the evil inclination. By digging this deeper layer and adding this new language of nefesh, what we call soul, animal soul versus godly soul. So just to explain. Let's start with the word nefesh. What does the word nefesh mean? So I kept on translating the word nefesh as soul. Nefesh Bahamas, animal soul. Nefesh Elokis, godly soul. But soul is not a properly accurate translation. The Hebrew word for soul is neshama. When the Alter Rebbe in chapter 1 introduces the idea of two souls, he says, L'chol ish Yisrael, to every Jewish person, echad tzaddik, echad rasha, whether he's a tzaddik, whether he's righteous or wicked, yesh shtei neshamas, there are two souls. Shehein, which they are, shtei nefashes, two nefashes. So two souls are two nefesh. So soul and neshama and nefesh are two different things. So nefesh can't be translated as soul if neshama is being translated as soul. Because Alter Rebbe is saying every Jew has two neshamas, which they are two different nefashos. Following? Following me or not so much? No? I'm just indicating that the word nefesh should not be translated as soul. Neshama is a soul. Now the Rebbe writes, every Jew has two neshamas, which they are two nefashos, which means a nefesh. This neshama is a nefesh. So this soul is a nefesh. So what's nefesh? It can't be soul, because that would be just the same translation. The soul is a soul. It's two different things, which is what he says. You have two neshamas, and these two neshamas are two nefashos. This nefesh, this neshama, the neshama alakis, the godly soul is a nefesh alakis, is a godly nefesh. And the neshama habahamis, the animal soul, is a nefesh animal, an animalistic nefesh. So what's a nefesh then? And moreover, the Alter Rebbe writes, if you listen carefully, l'chol ish Yisrael, every single Jew, echad tzaddik, echad rasha, whether he's wicked or righteous. Which means even the tzaddik, which the Alter Rebbe declares has no yetzer hara, still has both nefesh. Which means even the tzaddik, which has no yetzer hara, has no evil inclination, has an animal soul.
So an animal soul is not equated to
Yetzer hara. Precisely. So what is it? So we have to get to what is nefesh. Because he says a person has two neshamas, two souls, and each soul is a nefesh. So what's a nefesh? So what I'm about to share with you is based on the Rebbe's comment on these words. The Rebbe has two comments on these words, and this is based on one of them, although I think this is the correct meaning of both of those comments, but certainly clearly in one of the comments. And the Rebbe's notes on Tanya, he comments here. So a nefesh is like this. A nefesh would properly, I think, translate it as a conscience. A conscience. Or in English, another word might be sentience. The sense that you feel alive, you feel you. You feel yourself.
that conscious or conscience?
Conscience. No, conscious.
Conscious.
Conscious, like be conscientiousness, being conscious. No, conscientious means to
Awareness.
focus, but self-awareness, being conscious of oneself. Not conscience. Sorry, you're right, because conscience is more like a yetzer tov.
It's like that.
Like a conscience is more like
Feeling
a yetzer tov, right? So this is conscious. To be conscious of oneself, sentience. I feel alive. I feel myself. I exist. That's a nefesh. Your soul becomes your nefesh. A soul is a spiritual entity. The soul is a spiritual entity that's independent of the body. A nefesh is really only in a body. A nefesh is the lowest level of the soul as it's invested in the body. The soul is a spiritual entity that exists in heaven, whether there's a body or not. There's a soul. It's a spiritual energy. But when it's invested in a body, now it becomes a nefesh. Now it becomes a conscious. Now it becomes a conscious being. It becomes self-aware. I tap my fingers and I feel it's me. I can close my eyes and I tap the table or I tap the finger, even if the sensation is technically the same. I know one's me and one's not me. Because I feel me. So what does the Rebbe say? The Rebbe writes that the animal soul, mislabeshes bedama adam, is enclosed in the blood of man. It's in the body. So the sense that the body feels alive, that's your animal soul. That's your animal nefesh. Why animal? Because the body's life is a biological creature like every other. Animals want to eat, sleep, drink, and have babies, and so do humans want to eat, sleep, and drink, and have babies. So we happen to have a more sophisticated version of eating, sleeping, and drinking. Okay, so we're a little more sophisticated animals. Instead of sleeping by digging a hole in the ground or sleeping under a pile of snow, we build fancy structures that last 100 years. But our biological drives are really the same. That's why he calls it the animal soul. And he actually has two other names for that soul. Animal soul, natural soul, and vivifying soul. Vivifying as in giving life to the body. My sense of being alive. That's the animal soul. So when I say I am hungry, that's the animal soul speaking. Because an animal also says I'm hungry. Doesn't verbalize it. It says moo instead. But the essential urge is the same. I'm a little more sophisticated. Right? So that's the nefesh habahamis, which is why he says even that tzaddik has one. Because otherwise, how does a tzaddik eat? How does a tzaddik sleep, drink? How does a tzaddik live in a body if it doesn't have an animal soul? A godly soul doesn't say, I'm hungry. A godly soul says there's a God to serve. The word I is not in the sentence. Following? So, echad tzaddik, echad rasha, whether you're righteous or whether you're wicked, you have an animal soul. Otherwise, there's no eating, sleeping, drinking, no having children, none of that. Because there's no you. There's no physical you. There's no biological you if there is no animal soul. An animal soul misappropriated can become a yetzer hara. If I overindulge my I, then eventually I will be inclined to doing negative things. Al even writes, quoting from the Zohar, that a Jewish yetzer hara doesn't want to do sin. It just wants to survive. But I overindulged enough, now it wants to sin. Because the I has been inflated.
So its natural state is just to
Survival.
survive.
That's correct.
That's its purpose.
Sorry?
Where's the ego?
So the ego is an overinflated I. If you let that I run amok, it becomes ego.
So it's an overinflated animal nefesh.
That would come a yetzer hara. The Chassidus explains the word yetzer, which we translate as inclination, could also be translated as tziyur, which means an image or a shape, a form. Meaning to say, I have desires and I can give it a form, a yetzer. That form could be ra, bad, or it could be toiv, good. I have an inner desire for lust. As a human, it's a biological urge, that's what happens. But I can give that a good form with one spouse, with mikvah, with thoughts of Hashem's blessing here and so on. Or it can be, that same lust can be formed and given a shape of completely horrible, hedonistic, who knows what. Same urge, same nefesh. But which form, which tziyur, which image did I give it? Ra, bad, or toiv, good? Which means even the nefesh of Bahamas could be in the yetzer toiv. Because even my biological urges could be good. So what's the difference between a tzaddik and an average person? An average person wakes up and says, I am hungry. Because their nefesh of Bahamas is their conscious self. I am hungry. Now, I remind myself, look, life is not about me. So I have to remember that when I eat, I'm eating because Hashem wants me to live so I can serve him better. So I introduce the godly soul thinking into my animal soul thinking, which is natural to me. And that's the normal state of humans. A tzaddik is already a whole nother breed. A tzaddik doesn't wake up and say, I'm hungry. A tzaddik wakes up and says, there's a body God needs me to feed. There's no I in that sentence. And that's his natural state of being, because naturally, the godly soul is his conscience. But he still has an animal soul, which he needs to feed. The Alter Rebbe quotes, I don't remember the source. Sorry?
The godly soul is his conscious.
So each of them, okay, so it's a good point. So each of them are a full set of consciousness. So the animal soul has thinking, has feelings, has urges, and the godly soul has thinking, feeling, and urges.
Both on a conscious level.
Both on a conscious level. One is self-centered, one is God-centered. They both are always active. But which one's my instinctual I? For most of us, the instinctual I is our biological urges. And then we need to introduce the godly soul thinking into it. For a tzaddik, his natural I is not an I, it's a God, it's a godly. And then the godly has a responsibility toward this thing called an animal soul in a body. He quotes Hillel HaZaken, where is it? It's chapter 6. I don't remember the source, but he quotes Hillel, which says, referring to his body, I need to go feed that widow. Talking about eating. As if like there's this other thing called a body he has to take care of. Sorry, I have to pause. I need to go feed that widow. Referring to his own body. How do you refer to it? Where's the language here?
Why widow? Why?
Because it's a detachment, because it's a sort of detachment. Where is it?
Like feeling bad for it.
Oh, exactly. It's a Perek class. Where is it? That was a Perek Vav.
There's no. It's not married to.
Where is it?
Oh.
Hold on a second. Where is it? Where is it? No, it's not. It's not involved. Oh, it's not involved. Can't even, I don't remember where it is. But he quotes that.
Fun.
It's a funny way of thinking about your own body, but that's how he treats his own eating. Can you imagine that? Doesn't even think of his own eating as if like I have to go I have to eat. No such thing as I have to eat. Yeah. Haluva. Where is it? Maybe it's in 35 actually.
Reminding me of the story you once told about the famous.
Sorry, what was that?
About the famous rabbi they were all sitting around, they all were craving ice cream. He finally got ice cream, and the rabbi's eating this. He is,
Listen, Nemanov, yeah.
this is ice cream. He kept eating.
Oh my, where is it?
Story, right?
Yeah, it's a kind of story like that.
It didn't really make any difference.
I remember Tanya's not going so well as it used to be. Not good. Where would it be? And so where would that be? Maybe it's yeah, 29. Okay. Compare the statement of Hillel the elder to his disciples, who when going to eat, used to say when he was going to perform an act of kindness to the lowly and poor creature, not the widow, lowly and poor creature. This comes from the Medrash, by which he meant his body, with which he regarded as if it were foreign to him. Therefore, he used the expression that he was performing an act of kindness toward his food by giving it, toward his body by giving it food. Because he himself is nothing but a divine soul. Not the widow, he's a lowly, poor and lowly creature. So why is it so important, this shift? Going from conscious nefesh to going from inclination to nefesh. Because when we think of an inclination as a standalone entity, here's a good inclination, here's a bad inclination. You could end up feel like you're fighting an uphill battle or never-ending battle. Because if it's a bad inclination, I have to cut it out. It's bad. I have to completely cut it out. And as we know, these things don't go anywhere. But when I understand it's a nefesh, when I understand that the problem here is not my essential state of being, the problem is the way in which my being has been manifest. There's the issue. Okay, so manifested a different direction. It gives you the ability to redirect. The very energy itself that has become the YETZER Tahara itself can be the YETZER Tarif. Because your nefesh is neutral. It's selfish. That's the way God created it. It's biological. It's self-centered. But it doesn't have to be bad. Could be redirected. So when we look at our desires that are within us that we know are bad, the YETZER Hara, we can identify what's at the root of this. What's the root desire here? Where's the nefesh here? And where did it go wrong? And can I redirect all that enthusiasm that I've been putting into this negative desire and put it into a good desire, which is the whole point. So this quotes the pasuk which says, "Rav tvuos b'koyach shor." Much is the grain produced by an ox. A man can sow a field and not do much. You put the man on top of an ox or behind an ox and redirect it, now he's doing a lot. So this is the parable for the godly soul versus the animal soul. The godly soul is not very enthusiastic. It's in a state of like equilibrium connection to God. Before the soul comes down to this world, it's a state of perfect equilibrium, no change, beautiful connection to Hashem. It's got emotion, but its emotion, it doesn't have a struggle.
Why is it that? Why is it, if you think of it as a godly soul coming from Hashem, you would think it would be more animated, more vigorous?
It's only because it's challenged by an animal soul. When it's unchallenged before it comes to the body, there's nowhere to go. It's just enjoying itself in a perfect state of union. There's nowhere to move. And because there's nowhere to move, it's the same reason why, as the Gemara puts it, that the Baal Tshuva reaches a place where a tzaddik can never. Because what's a tzaddik fighting? He's there. He was always there. like to fight. The Baal Tshuva has to fight to get where he is. So his presence is so much more excited and so much more active and so much more passionate because he had to fight to get here. Tooth and nail, he had to fight. And in many ways, that's why the soul comes down to the body. It's for the tshuva. Right? To be challenged by the animal soul's strong, selfish urge, and then fought through, and the animal soul ends up coming along. And all that vigor that the animal soul brings in its passion and lust ends up using toward Hashem. This explains why the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, greater is one moment of teshuvah and good deeds down here than all the world to come. It's a strange phrasing. Teshuvah and good deeds, Torah and mitzvahs. Greater is 1 minute of Torah and mitzvahs in this world than the world to come. Why teshuvah and ma'asim tovim? Teshuvah and good deeds. So explains Chassidus. Torah and mitzvahs is a connection to God. The world to come is also a connection to God, and a better one than ours. More beautiful one. It's perfect. It's wonderful. They're communion with God all day long. But teshuvah, that doesn't exist up there. Fighting for a connection to Hashem doesn't exist. That's teshuvah. I'm returning to Hashem. I'm away from Hashem because I'm in this body, even if it's not teshuvah of sin. Right? The Gemara says a person should be his whole days in teshuvah. I mean, even if a person never sinned, he should still be doing teshuvah. The teshuvah in the sense that my soul is down here, it's far from God, I'm returning to God by fighting through the challenges. And that's what's worth it down in this world more than the whole world to come. And that's why it refers to good deeds. Chassidus explains, because this passion takes the deeds and makes them good. The mitzvahs that you do are now in a holy, goodly fashion because it's teshuvah, because I'm returning and fighting to return to Hashem. Connection to Hashem, mitzvah on its own, the soul has in the world to come. But in this world, it's ma'asim tovim, it's good deeds. The deeds themselves become goodly. The very same mitzvah becomes goodly because it's now been invigorated with that passion. Right, so this is the animal soul's energy. The energy that we thought was a YETZER hara, that it is a YETZER hara. But it's only an external form that passion has been given. And I can reshape that same energy to a good form, to a YETZER tov. Because I know it's a nefesh. It's not stuck being a YETZER hara. It's only a nefesh that's gone wrong and can be redirected. And this, of course, explains the famous Gemara, which says, the pasuk says, you should love God, your Lord, with all your heart. Usually when you say your heart, you say libcha. And here the pasuk puts two vases, lavavcha, as if to say with all your hearts, plural. So it says the Gemara, because you love Hashem with your YETZER tov and your YETZER hara, with your good inclination, with your bad inclination. How could you love God with the YETZER hara? If the YETZER hara is a fixed thing and bad, how could you possibly love Hashem with the YETZER hara? But now we understand, because the YETZER hara is not fixed in being bad. It's a nefesh that's been shaped wrongly. If I reshape it, that very same energy, now what was the YETZER hara is now love of Hashem. And this is, sorry?
Is the YETZER hara always tied to the animal soul? There's no YETZER hara of
the godly soul? No. I'm saying that even the YETZER tov is an animal soul. It's the same energy. It's been
the other way around, not the YETZER hara.
They're both the animal soul.
But not both in the godly soul.
No, the godly soul is in other words, a godly soul detached from the body is in perfect state of communion and equilibrium 24/7. There's no change. When it comes into the animal soul, now it's fighting a change. It's either going to be YETZER shaped this way, tov, or shaped that way, bad, because it's moving the nefesh one way or the other. Right? Now, this brings us back full circle. This idea of Chassidus explaining Kabbalistic ideas in a manner that the human mind can understand. That's the whole point. Not just to talk to a human out there, but to talk to my human. My human side, my animal soul has to understand God, has to appreciate why it's worth it being passionate for Hashem. And I'll conclude with a story that I've shared before, which makes this point. The story is it's not a true story, but it makes the point. Rabbi Chadakov says this story. It's the Rebbe's secretary, who was like an educator, an educational master. So he used to say this story, or at least he said it once, at least, of a young child, of a man, a farmer, who has a son. I told you the story before. He saved up all of his money, and he sent his son to college. Okay, so he's a simple farmer, but at least his son's getting an education. His son finally comes home, so he's excited. He takes his son out to their favorite restaurant. They both order a steak. Yeah. Now the father is eating the steak, and so is his son. Now the father, who's a farmer, appreciates what good beef is, and says in Yiddish, machaya, which means, this is life. Appreciating the good beef. Yeah. The son's sitting eating the same steak, and in the room, there's music playing. And this kid, while he was in university, learned a little bit about music and started to appreciate it. So he also says, machaya, this is life. Not about the steak, but about the music. Yeah. In the same room, there's a professor eating the same steak, listening to the same music. And he also says, machaya, this is life. But he says it about his math book. Now, down the street, there's a yid davening. And he says, Va'ata machaya es kulam. And you, God, give life to them all. So they're all saying, this is life. The question is, of what? Of food, of music, of the arts, of mathematics or whatever, or of Hashem. So this is talking to the animal soul, because the animal soul enjoys life. But if we can talk to our own human animal soul and tell our animal soul what's the most valuable thing in life is a connection to Hashem and a connection to our fellow Jew, then all the animal soul's passion for life is now invested in serving Hashem. So it all ties back to the same point. Chassid is speaking in the language that a human can understand, not necessarily to the human out there, him too, but to my human. Not just my godly soul should appreciate God, but my animal soul should appreciate God and bring along with it all this passion. And its passion should be YETZER, the form, the tzir, the form of bad, become YETZER, the form of good. Have a wonderful day, Yidden. As I mentioned, this Alter Rebbe's Yartzeit, so it's a good opportunity to recommit ourselves to the study of Tanya and the Alter Rebbe's teachings in general. And so we'll pick up, God willing, next Monday, and God willing, we'll hear good news from one another.
Amen. Safe trip.
Thank you. Thank you.
Only the best.
Amen. Thank you very much.